the first question I have here is, who is in their 30s right now? Wow. Who here is past 35? Who here has a little bit of trepidation about hitting the big 4-0? Just a little bit. Who questions it just a little bit? Okay. There's some people who are not going to question it, but there's going to be people who question it, obviously the ones who've raised their hands here. But I'm going to begin, I guess, this conversation by telling you how I came up with the idea of Fortytude/dude. It started off 3 years ago at the age of 37. I just turned 40, and I was a psychotherapist, and I was so disconnected from my age to the point where I really thought I was 25. And I had a number of women coming into my practice who were really starting to become quite anxious about turning 40. The reasons were different. One woman who was 35 came in and said, "My God, I'm turning 40 in 5 years. I'm married. I have 3 kids. I need to have an affair." And I looked at her, I'm like, "What?" She's like, "Because when I turn 40, that's it. I'm losing my sexuality." Then there would be another woman who would come in, and she would, she was 42, and she said, "I'm a managing director. I make $1.5 million a year, but I don't have a boyfriend. I don't have kids. Am I still viable for dating?" So as you can imagine, the list goes on and on and on. This is in my private practice. And I thought, is this just a problem that upper to middle class women in New York City have? So I started to do a little bit more investigation in a clinic where I worked that served women who were actually impoverished. And these were the disenfranchised women, primarily African-American women, Hispanic women who were former drug addicts. And I started to realize that the women who were coming to see me in this clinic were also experiencing a lot of angst about going into their 40s. Now, the reasons were different. They felt as if because they were right in the middle, they couldn't get the Medicaid, the Medicare, and they also couldn't no longer receive Medicaid because their children were too old. But they also didn't feel as if they couldn't find the father because they were no longer young enough, and they were not old enough to really be considered as the grandmothers of the community. So they were pretty stuck on turning 40 and hitting their 40s. That said, I thought this is really, really interesting, but it's not that interesting. What's going to make it more interesting is for myself and for all these other women around me to really explore what it is about the aging process. But I still was not that connected because I still thought that I was 25. Until I turned 38 and I was single and I didn't even have a boyfriend on the horizon and I didn't have any kids, and my 20th reunion, high school reunion, was coming up, and I said, and I tend to drop the F-bomb, so pardon me, but I said, no fucking way am I going to go to my high school reunion as the only single person with no kids, nothing to prove. And I thought to myself, I stepped back, I'm like, oh, right. I am definitely not practicing what I'm preaching to all the women in my private practice and in the clinic. So I decided to take this on as a project, and I traveled across the country to really understand what it was about being in our 30s, really 35, and what it's going to be like turning 40. So I traveled to Oxford, Mississippi, Washington, D.C., Provo, Utah, Dallas, Texas, Livingston, Montana, Venice, California, you name it. And what I did was I facilitated these discussion groups with 20 to 30 women for 3 hours to really understand what we were all experiencing. Was there a common denominator? And the common denominator was, even if you were a Latter-day Saint or a single mom living in New York City, the common denominator was, who am I once I really reach 40? No longer am I going to be that person who can make the excuse of, well, I'm still figuring out who I am. No longer can I make the excuse of, well, I still haven't made that much money, but I still have many more steps that I need to take. Or, it's fine, I'm still going to find my Prince Charming. So I thought to myself, I'm like, well, whose voices are we hearing that we're feeling a lot of this angst? And I asked myself, and I asked a lot of these women across the nation, and a lot had to do with, as you can imagine, society. right? And a lot had to do with our parents. And even though we may consider ourselves individualized from our parents, they still sometimes, their voices still resonate when we, especially when we feel a little bit at a loss. Now what I had done was I thought, okay, what we need as women is we need to go into our 40s with a metaphorical toolbox. And in that metaphorical toolbox, I really believe that we need to find some values that we need to use as our guiding principle so that we really feel not just whole, but that we can go in with fortitude. Hence the title of the book that I've written is Fortytude. And then I asked a lot of the women about what values came up, and I made a list of 15 values, and I really thought about these values very carefully. And it seemed that there was 5 values that kept coming up, regardless of where these women were coming from. And the 5 values were grace, connectedness, accomplishment, adventure, and spirituality. And obviously, with those 5 values, I thought those are the guiding principles that we need to incorporate in our everyday lives to move forward, to have fortitude. Fast forward. I'm telling this to a lot of the men when they said, what are you working on? I said, I'm working on this book, but it's not going to be relevant to you. You're going to roll your eyes. It's another self-help book. And when they really asked me, I said, it's a book about, what happens when we go into our 40s. And they said, why have you not written a book for men? This is exactly what I'm struggling with. I said, okay, I'll think about that in the future, and maybe I'll call the book FortyDude. And they said, that's fantastic. But when I thought about what are the 2 values out of those 5 values that I think that both men and women struggle with, it is the sense of adventure and the sense of accomplishment. And especially now, I think, during our 30s and during these economic tough times. And I really want to figure out what is it that makes it so difficult for men and women with those definitions. I personally believe, and you may disagree with me, it is the pressure that we may feel from the opposite sex or from society. Men, in general, what I've noticed, feels that I'm not accomplished enough because I'm not making enough money. Therefore, I really can't provide for the family that I would like to have. Women feel when they hit their mid-30s, well, I'm not accomplished enough because I have not reached that milestone of being married or having kids, and when they hit 40, they don't feel like they have been accomplished enough because they're not viable, or they're not accomplished because they've hit the magical 40, and men are not going to be attracted to them. Adventure is also another one, and this is something that I think that both men and women tend to struggle with, which is we are all adventurous. We're all here. We're doing something that's a little bit beyond our comfort zone. But I also think that when we hit our mid-30s to our 40s, we tend to feel like adventure equals recklessness, which we were given the permission to do when we were in our 20s, but not in our 30s and our 40s. So I thought, oh, that's really interesting. How can we help the opposite gender and each other, meaning men help men and women help women and women help men and men help women, define what it is to be accomplished without the materialistic factor, without the monetary factor, and without responding to societal or familial messages. Meaning, how do we really listen to our own voices of what it is to be accomplished without any of those 4 pressures? Also, how do we define what it is to have adventure in our lives without judging ourselves, without feeling like we're being reckless or we're being impulsive or we're being irresponsible? And that is why I wanted you to look at what you have written down and look at accomplishment. And I would like anyone here to volunteer, to raise their hands, and to let me know how they define accomplishment and what their doubts were. And if it has anything to do with what I've been saying, or is it something that's completely unrelated to what I was saying? Anyone want to share?
So I wrote, they are the same thing.
Adventure and accomplishment is the same thing. And tell me more about that. And what's your doubt about adventure and accomplishment?
It's trusting the process.
And what's the process that you don't trust?
that everything was going to be okay.
And what would not make it okay?
What would not make it okay? That I spontaneously combust.
Okay. Okay. And when you think about it, though, do you ever feel like someone is judging you when you think about the adventure that you would want to go on or how you would want to accomplish?
Oh yeah, for sure, but it's my own judgment.
And it's no one else's?
Probably not. Most
Okay.
people that I run into have a positive opinion of me. Surprised all the time.
Okay. So it's really you who's putting the pressure on yourself. Okay. And when you think about adventure and you think about accomplishment, do any monetary factors come in?
Mm-hmm. Actually, there's a girl that I like right now, and when you said that the monetary thing, I'm an entrepreneur, and the first thing that I think about when I think of her is, no way, dude, you cannot, exactly what you said about
Right.
being able to provide is the first thought that comes into my head.
Right. Right, exactly. So now, because of I don't know what would other men agree with this gentleman here? Raise your hands if the guys here, would you say that? Okay. What woman here would say, we're not necessarily attracted to how much money you're making. That's not what we're drawn to here. What woman would like to volunteer and say, that's not exactly what I'm drawn to right away with a man of how much money you're going to make? I'm raising my hand. And that's exactly the conversation that needs to be had, which is there's so much more that women are drawn to in men other than the fucking money sign. Pardon my French once again. And I say this to you because as a woman, I do come from a pretty high profile family. My dad's Tom Brokaw. That in itself is intimidating to men. But it also comes along with, she comes from a lot of money. There is no way I can measure up. And I would like to say, you know what? As a woman, as a human, what's going to be attractive to me is when you define a sense of accomplishment that has nothing to do with money. And that could look like that you have a passion in whether it's community service, whether it is fixing a car, whether it is, I don't know, throw something out there, women. Anything. What's that?
Ski bum. Ski bum, she said.
Ski bum. Something that you...
Squaw Valley.
Right, or you ski Squaw Valley. Something that you are accomplished and that you feel you take great pride in, and it raises your energy level, right? Women, I'm wondering about women here. Who here is married? Isn't that fascinating? Who here, and please be honest, okay? Who here sometimes question when someone says, so you're not married? And they think, oh my God, in their mid-30s. Please raise your hand. Okay, isn't that interesting? Who here also sometimes, because you don't have kids and you see other, and I don't know who here doesn't want to have kids, right? But I do, right? Who here feels like, oh my God, am I ever going to be able to have a kid? Am I ever going to be able to make that accomplishment in having a kid? Raise your hand. Isn't that interesting? Now my question is, who here fears that you're not married, that you don't have kids, that when you're getting closer to 40, then men are going to start looking at you as not unviable candidates for dating? Raise your hand. That's interesting. So I'm going to ask you, because you didn't raise your hand.
Yeah. Ask me.
I'm going to ask you, do you feel comfortable getting closer to 40, not being married, not having kids,
Yep,
that you will find your mate?
I do.
Okay. That's wonderful. Now that's something that if you could continue to work with other women, that to me is so important, to allow other women to let them know what it is that makes you feel at ease. Now I would like to have a male participant to be very honest. If you feel that women in their mid-30s who don't have kids, who are not married, what is it that makes a woman really attractive? Is it really about wearing the hot yoga pants and running around here? Or is it something else? And I think all men may differ. So I'm going to ask Sean, who's in the back right there.
Could you restate the question?
This question is, if you were to look at a woman and you didn't know her age, but you're going to be attracted to her. And there's always going to be some, I think, identifying characteristic that you're going to be drawn to in a woman. What is that characteristic?
Well, I would split that into two parts.
Okay.
I would say there's probably a classic male eyeball reaction, which is based on physical beauty and physical attributes, but I would say that for me and probably almost every man I know doesn't last very long if there isn't substance behind it. And so the substance and what really makes someone attractive, I think, for me is probably intelligence.
Intelligence.
Or the conversation or the ability to have
Right.
a connection in that way.
And would you think with intelligence comes like wisdom?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But wisdom also needs to be tempered with frivolity and adventure and some of the other things we talked.
Right, exactly. So I guess what I'm intended to do here is to have this conversation, or to provide a platform where the conversation needs to be had amongst women, where women can actually be wonderful role models, such as yourself. And Sean, I don't know that well, but it's a message that Sean can, convey to other, or to women, saying it's not just about how good you look in your yoga pants. Regardless of whether you're 20 or in your 50s, like Shiva Ray, who looks amazing in her yoga pants, has so much to do about, I would imagine what you're saying, is to have a true sense of self is knowing how to have fun, I believe. Adventure. Let's go to adventure. Who here feels like they really are looking at life as an adventure all the time? Raise your hand. Okay. Who here questions sometimes about what adventure is, and are they not being adventurous enough? Okay. And if you could think about what that adventure looks like, what is blocking you from having that adventure? Is it your job? Raise your hand if it's your job. It's money. Money? Money, right. What's so interesting is that I treat a lot of couples, right, where accomplishment and adventure comes up repeatedly in my sessions, and they don't know exactly why they're both struggling with that. And I say immediately, people are funny about money all the time. If we were to remove that factor, how can you define adventure? Does that mean adventure cannot exist in your life if you don't have money? You're saying it can exist? It can exist, exactly. And that is when I think it's especially important, especially during these very difficult times in our economy, to come up with our own definition of what it is to be adventurous without the monetary factor. What is it also to be accomplished without the 4 factors that I had mentioned before? And that's also in the factors is money. And that is the challenge that we face, but instead of looking at it as a challenge, at moments when you're feeling like you said, oh my gosh, she's not going to be attracted to me and I'm stuck and I like her, look at it as a sparkly moment and think, what else though is she going to be attracted to? And I guarantee if you have a real strong sense of what adventure means and what accomplishment means, without the monetary factor, she is going to be so drawn to you. She is going to be so drawn. What woman would agree with me on that? Okay. I'm also wondering about the accomplishment. If you question as a woman about being accomplished, who here is married? Okay. Do you question sometimes, and you're married as well? Okay. As a woman, though, do you work?
No.
Okay. Do you at times feel that you're not accomplished, that you feel like I'm just a mom?
Yes.
Okay. And then I would challenge you and say, obviously, being a mom is one of the biggest accomplishments that is underappreciated and unpaid. And that's something that you have to be mindful of every day, and men need to be mindful of that every day. And if there is something that you would like to accomplish and you just don't know how to do it, that is when you need to start the conversation with your peers, men and women. whatever it is? Do you have something that you would like to be accomplished with?
Me personally?
That you feel like there's a block?
Oh, there's about 1,000 things I'd love to do.
Okay. If you could choose one that raises your energy level.
I'd like to be a master chef.
Okay. Your task is to go online and figure out where you can actually take advanced cooking classes. I'm just going to throw that out there because I have 2 minutes left. Okay, I'm going to wrap things up, and I hope that kind of got your brains percolating a little bit. But I think this is the moment right now where both men and women need to participate in a conversation about what it is to be accomplished, what it is to be adventurous without the monetary factor, without responding to societal messages nor familial messages. And even though you say, God, I'm only judging myself, I bet if there is a voice that's other than your own, that you just need to turn down the volume just a little bit, then you'll really be able to clarify what those values that you have, how you possess those values, and how you play out those values every day into your 40s and beyond. That said, thanks so much, you guys, for coming in. And just wanted to let you know that I do have my book coming out March 1st, 2011. It's called Fortytude, and it will talk about the very 5 values that I had mentioned. And they're wonderful examples of women who are, well, profiles of women who are exemplars of those 5 values, who are in their 40s and beyond. And all these women who I profiled are real. Not one of them is well known. And I think you're going to really appreciate this book. Thank you.